Hello there GCSEers, and today we're going to try and answer the question, is there any evidence for the afterlife? And then we're going to look at this evidence, and we're going to look at what the arguments are against that evidence. Okay, now in the exam, you're going to be asked on the immortality section information about examples of how you can be immortal. And those are the things that we've looked at already, things like legacy and reincarnation and resurrection and in the memory of others, all those things that we've looked at in the past 3 units. Then you're going to be asked the question, is there any evidence? Now when we look at evidence, we're going to look at actually what it is that people use to believe that there is an afterlife. And we're going to look at the evidence, and we're going to look at arguments against that evidence as well. Okay, so let's start here with Scripture. Now Scripture is obviously a religious holy book that people believe is religious and holy. If you've got the Quran in Islam, you've got the Bible in Christianity. And here's a good example that we've used throughout the course, is that Jesus' resurrection itself is evidence that people live on after life, because Jesus died and then rose 3 days later after being crucified by the Romans in first century Palestine. Now the key thing here is to remember that that is evidence for the afterlife for millions and millions of people across the world. In fact, the vast majority of the world believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and because of that they will go to heaven and hell. Now that's evidence in itself. But the argument against that, the problem with that, is that many people just accept that it's true. It's what they've been brought up to believe by their family, and it's no real evidence that there's an afterlife. You can't actually go there and things like that, obviously not, because you have to go there when you die. And it's also written in a time where there was little or no scientific knowledge. And because there was little or no scientific knowledge, then is it actually just wishful thinking? Is it just what people expect and want to happen? That's number one. So that's Scripture, arguments for and arguments against. Number 2, ghosts. Now many of you, I know, probably say that you believe in ghosts. And ghosts are manifestations of dead people, and are often seen by one or many people. And it's basically seen to be evidence that people rise up again into different bodies, into a spirit realm. For example, here's a great story of the Chapel Bridge ghost in Droitwich, where a verger who was like a priest would go from the chapel, and he'd go to the local pub every night and drink a lot, and then get back on his horse and go back home. And one night it was a bad stormy night, and there was a bolt of lightning, and the horse bolted, and both of them ran into the bridge, into the stream, and died. And now it's said that on the Chapel Bridge street in Droitwich, in the place where you live, his ghosts haunt forever in there. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's something I found out about. Now the problem with ghosts, of course, being evidence for an afterlife, is there's no scientific evidence for ghosts. Could they be a hoax, just a trick of the light, just something that people perceive and then it's gone? Okay, for thousands of years people have believed in ghosts, but the actual tales and the stories of them have got less and less as our advancements in science and our advancement in reason and things like that have come on. So, are ghosts real? No scientific evidence, okay, but people claim to see them. Is that evidence that there's life after death? Now the third one here is something called channeling. Now channeling is, for example, this woman here, you might have heard of her, Psychic Sally. She claims to be able to speak to the dead. You might have seen her on the television, where she'll get a whole room of people and say, oh, I see there's someone called John, and people will come and say, oh, that's me, and that kind of thing. Many people believe that that's evidence for life after death. Okay, people can communicate with the dead by talking to them and actually claiming that they can talk to them via things like that. Now, this is often seen as a hoax. Or someone called Darren Brown, he calls it cold reading, where people are able to actually look at a subject, somebody who something's happened to them, and they're able to read what's actually happened to them in their lives through the way that they react to certain questions and certain responses that they make. You might want to look at that one in a bit more detail. Cold reading, as I say, the man called Darren Brown. Now the fourth one is near-death experiences. Now near-death experiences are quite complicated, and some people claim, usually during a medical operation or something like that, that they actually die. And what happens is they have an experience of what happens, and this often involves maybe images of what's happened to them in their lives, or an idea of going through a channel or a tube to an afterlife, and even talking to people who they've died and who they can looking back about the experiences that they've actually happened. And the key thing is that this happens all over the world. Okay, and there's certain characteristics that they actually see as relevant to each of them. for example, the going down of a tunnel, or a feeling of happiness. Although many people, about 10% of near-death experiences, people say that they have a hell-like experiences. And often these experiences change people's lives. They can change people's lives for the better, okay, and actually make them experience and have something that, you know, will make them maybe see God or experience their lives, or change them for being better people because they see that they are actually going to heaven. Now, the problem with these experiences, near-death experiences, is that they can be explained by the brain. As somebody dies, their brain shuts down. It's a slower process than actually the death itself. And as the brain is starved of oxygen, this can lead to images coming in a tunnelling effect. And science actually says that the person is not actually dead. So it's not evidence of immortality because they're being brought back to life. And the experience that they actually have is the idea that, you know, their brain shutting down and the various things that happen because of that. Now, the last one we're going to look at is some people believe that they can remember their former lives. For example, the BBC recently did a documentary about a boy from Scotland. And he believed that he had a former life and he could remember all the things that happened to him in this former life, and he would tell his mum about it. He was very small, and he believed he lived very, very, you know, reasonably close to where he was in Glasgow, at a place called Barra. And basically he told his mum this story, his mum wrote it down, and the BBC went off and they looked at it and they saw whether what he actually said was true, whether some things were good and some things were bad. And you can get it on YouTube and you can have a look, just look at The Boy Who Lived Again, okay, and watch it on YouTube. And some of the things he got right and some of the things he got wrong. And the key thing is that, you know, these kind of experiences are all over the world. People claim that they can remember past lives. They claim that they can actually see what actually happened in their past, you know, lives that they've experienced. But the trouble is with it, the problem is with it, is they're very few and far between. If there was more evidence for it, if more people actually did it, I mean, I don't know how many people in, let's say, this school can claim to remember our past lives, then surely if it was real, more people would remember it. More people would be able to say, yes, I recall what happened to me when I was in my former life. So, ladies and gentlemen, 5 ways that people can claim to have evidence of an afterlife. 1, scripture, things like Jesus' resurrection, but do we have enough proof for that? 2, ghosts. Many people believe in ghosts. Don't forget your Chapel Bridge ghost in Droitwich. However, there's no scientific evidence of it, and as history's gone on, people less and less see ghosts. Number 3, channeling, psychic Sally, okay, and all her claims to be able to speak to the dead, and many mediums and people like that. However, people like Darren Brown would argue against that and say it's just cold reading. Again, make sure you have a look at that. But 4, near-death experiences, people who have an operation and claim that they've been able to see their bodies and have an experience afterwards. The problem with that is science says as the brain shuts down, all those kind of things are commonplace. Or finally, number 5, people remembering their former lives. You know, hundreds of people across the world claiming that they can recall what's happened to them in a past life. But the problem with that, remember, is why doesn't everybody get it? And as with all this evidence for an afterlife, ladies and gentlemen, and whether you believe that actually people can live forever, then it's up to you whether you think that this is evidence enough to say, yes, there must be something that lives on after you die, or no, I don't think so. There can't be an afterlife, and this is the only life that we get. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as always, what do you think?